Hello and welcome everyone. This is Talk Movie Talks. I'm here with Matt, and we are here to discuss Brian De Palma, two of his kind of landmark films, one being Scarface and the other being The Blowout. And I want to just start off right off the bat, Matt. Scarface is like one of those iconic gangster movies, and from the get go, do you kind of have anything that really struck you? Because this was both yours and my first watch of the movie Scarface.
Yeah, I guess, what I was saying before, how it's infused its way into pop culture just in general, and how much of I guess the characters and the lines that I already kind of recognize through, other movies and music, especially too, um, that I just didn't realize had come from Scarface already. So that was probably the biggest thing. I noticed, and there's also you see so many images of Tony Montana in that last shootout scene. Like everybody has seen, him sitting at his table,
Mm.
basically about to meet his fate. It is just, I feel like this is one of those films, maybe like a Pulp Fiction that's kind of really made its way into everybody knows the two characters in Pulp Fiction, kind of like everyone knows Tony Montana from Scarface.
Yeah, I think it truly is one of the most iconic movies of all time. Like it has to be top 25 most iconic, I think, because what you were saying I find to be super true as well. That and then another movie that's kind of like that, which I just recently saw for the first time, is Psycho. It's a movie where you have seen, whether it be stills from the movie or heard lines from the movie and watched scenes from the movie, that there was a familiarity to it. And I think one of the things that kept me from watching it for so long is ultimately one of its saving graces, in that the 3 hour runtime left so many scenes that I wasn't familiar with, that it didn't feel like I was kind of rewatching a movie I'd never seen before. Did you kind of feel that way too? Does that make any sense?
Yeah, and I feel like the 3 hour runtime for this was completely justified. Like the way the pacing was, and how I already kind of knew the story of the movie before watching it, but I didn't know about the different interesting subplots and things that happen. So it still kept me engaged and wanting to watch the film, even though you kind of already know the story. He's going to rise to the top and then he's going to have a downfall, but the movie itself was still able to keep me interested, across the whole 3 hour time period.
Yeah, and something that to kind of expand upon what you were saying with the runtime, not only did it feel justified, the pacing felt. There are a few 3 hour movies that felt that well paced. I mean, it felt like a 2 hour movie or less. Like it just was so fast paced. I was so into it that the 3 hours went by in seemingly no time.
Yeah, yeah. I think it also, it had a very, I guess, out of all these, movies we've discussed, a very easy to follow plot,
Mm-hmm.
which, but there were so many different characters involved, and it's not one of those movies where I guess, like, basing off the easy to follow thing, like, I knew who all the characters were at all times. I was never, confused about it, and in 3 hour movies with all these different players involved, it's hard a lot to, keep track of who everybody is, but something in the movie just made it easy.
Oh yeah, I totally agree with you. And you knew where everyone was kind of heading. Like not like in a spoiler type of way where you knew someone was gonna die, but you had a sense of like who was at odds and how the dynamics were for everyone, like who was an enemy of Montana and who was like a genuine friend to him. And that could easily make a movie predictable, and yet that didn't feel like the case because it was such an explosive and exciting movie that man, the action scenes but also the dialogue was just it was enthralling, I guess.
The dialogue is so memorable, and another thing, you know, that I thought kept me engaged was, how Al Pacino or Tony Montana, his character is just very different in the way of how aggressive he is and how he doesn't really seem to have, a soft side aside from his, family and sister, which is a whole kind of weird thing, itself. But, um, like, his aggression and his just, like, how he continues to do what he wants in every situation, no matter, like, what the consequences are. I just thought that for me really helped keep me interested because you're kind of like, you don't know what he's gonna do next.
No, I completely agree. I want to take just a couple seconds to say thank you for joining us. If you're watching this, be sure to hit like, be sure to hit subscribe on the video, and also check out Matt's letterbox down below. But what I wanted to say to that, Matt, is when I was growing up, I thought I had the brilliantly unique idea that a movie should follow a villain. And I thought I was one of the first masterminds to come up with something like this as like a younger teenage person. And this is a lot of the movies we've covered, westerns especially, have an anti-hero with obviously kind of leaning more towards that hero-esque element. But Scarface is arguably, he's pretty deep into the dark side, especially by the end of this movie. And there's redeeming qualities that you want to like him so much. But if you look at him at the face, it really does feel like a movie in which you're following around the villain.
Yeah, he's, like, not an anti-hero where, like those other movies, we've discussed where you kind of can find a reason to like them, and I still like Tony Montana's character, but, like, the movie gives you really no reason to like him. Like, he doesn't, have any loyalty. He's that like he doesn't have any a redemption arc whatsoever in the film. It's like his path goes to just destruction, and like it ends there. Like he but for some reason, you still like him, and I think it might be just because how charismatic he is.
Yeah, you stole the words right out of my mouth. That's what I was gonna. I honestly, I think, I mean, the the suits he's able to wear, the money he is able to have. I think Michelle Pfeiffer. Am I correct? Is that the female lead in this movie?
Oh, I'm not sure. I can look, but she, is a model, very attractive.
Yeah, especially for young men, like anyone under the age of 50 is going to be able to look at a Tony Montana, and there's some element to what he has that you're like, I mean, I wouldn't mind being that, having the what do they call it, just the monetary freedom that he has. And he is on top of that, like you said, he is always the most charismatic in the room. And when it comes to quotability, it's like every other phrase he says, if he's not telling someone to F off or F you, it's he's saying something memorable. Like it feels like in the heyday of wrestling when they had catchphrases that they would throw out there, but he's just ripping them off like at a rapid fire rate where he's one of the most quotable characters I've ever come across. And I think that is the part that it's able to suck you in despite every action he takes kind of being, at some level of disgusting.
Yeah, and I think for me, a lot of maybe why it's so quotable is because of how, I guess maybe confidence isn't even the right word, because it's like beyond confidence, where he is just, it's as if he knows he's going to get everything he wants. And
Mm.
he just straight up tells people that. And he like does not care at all what they think, because he's like, I guess you could compare him to just one of those, like a what you call a small person who would blow up all the time or explode, like how people said Napoleon was, or
Napoleon
something like that.
complex. Yeah.
Yes, Napoleon. Yeah, like, but it's like that, except he's always exploding. Like he's never holding back, and like his pursuit of Michelle Pfeiffer's character is like just, to me it's crazy, because you would think that she wants nothing to do with him, but it was so funny how like one of those quotable lines was when they're driving in the car back, and he's like, she likes me, right after like she just told him to like go away, basically. It's just funny.
Yeah, and the movie almost kind of outlines like his just being such a steady pressure on her is seemingly what makes, and also as he climbs the power scale, that is ultimately how the stars align for those two to get together. But it is funny how she looks down upon him very early on, seems disgusted by him, and he has it in his head, and like seemingly everything he puts his mind to in this movie, he's able to accomplish. And then once he's at the top, is ultimately there's nowhere else to go. And it's like the story is just that's the perfect climax because it's like, all right, I've reached the top of the mountain. Now I'm just gonna go down the other side in a complete avalanche and destroy everything on the way down.
Yeah, and I was just thinking how it's kind of interesting how his attitude just stays the same even when he's on top, but it's like he has nothing more to like take from anyone else. So it's like, what can he do except he ends up, starts destroying what he actually cares about. But then you don't really see him like, get upset about that or anything like that, which I think is part of why it makes it hard to feel bad for him in the end, because you just, he's going out in his blaze of glory, and he's risen to the top, and then he's, taken himself down and everybody else that he was at the top with.
Yeah. I think you touched upon a really interesting point is that I didn't really sympathize with him. I sympathized with the people he hurt, certainly, especially as we get to the end. There's some scenes where you do feel deeply for the people affected around him, but yeah, specifically Montana, it's like, I mean, you have to pay the piper at some point, right?
Yeah, yeah, and yeah.
One thing that I think has to be said, and I honestly like it's gonna sound super super obvious, but it almost goes overlooked just because the entirety of the movie is so good, but it's almost you know it's Al Pacino, right? But it is such a unique performance. Um, at this point, I've seen him enough to know he's a great actor and that he can really throw himself into a role. But it is an absolutely transformative performance to the point where like the accent he has the whole time. I truly I'm sure a lot of people have given him a lot of props, but this has got to rank really high on some of like as one of the best performances I've ever seen.
Yeah, I agree because I've seen him in a lot of other movies where he's like a very similar character to this, like The Godfather and Heat and Dog Day Afternoon, even a little bit. Uh, but it's like his performance in this movie, I think, outshines all those, and those are all like really good movies. But it's something about you would have felt, or I would have assumed, and this probably isn't correct, that he somehow method acted for this. Like he went and lived with or hung out with Cuban people for a long time to try and get a sense of, uh, maybe the way they talk and their dialect and stuff like that. But I don't think he's a method actor.
Yeah, I am not sure. Obviously, modern day, there's a couple people that I'm familiar are method. I think Daniel Day Lewis. I think Jared Leto is. I know Dustin Hoffman had method acted at certain points, but to my knowledge, Al Pacino. I'm not sure if he did or not, but it felt like he he felt so comfortable in this role, and it's such a demanding role as well. Where if there was a scene that he didn't bring the type of energy that he has throughout the entire movie, I think the scene would fall flat. And the it, and that is also the fact that the ball never gets dropped is why the 3 hours is just electric the whole way through.
Yeah, and I mean, he like it's interesting because I think the performances from the other characters are really good as well, but it's like in comparison to him, it just is not, he carries the movie.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. No, I completely agree. Um, there's a lot of movie stars that they have this aura on them. Um, I think a movie star that you had said you'd begun to get more familiar with is Cary Grant. Uh, North by Northwest. He doesn't have this extreme energy the way that Al Pacino does, right? But he has this magnetism to him that I think you would probably testify to, where he has this sense of a movie star, whereas Pacino is just so into this role and this character has been cultivated that he is like the core of the sun. There's just so much energy there, just ready to explode. Where it almost transcends like beyond the fact that Al Pacino's in this scene. He's a big movie star. It's like this character is in this scene. What is he going to do?
Yeah, like when I think of like Cary Grant or Jimmy Stewart, it's funny because like you're saying, they're completely different in the way like that or I'm guessing most people see them in movies. Like Cary Grant is charismatic, but it's kind of like you always know that that's Cary Grant. I guess this is kind of like what you were just saying, but and same like with Jimmy Stewart, like they kind of play all like the similar types of characters. Like they're the what you would picture the 50s like stereotypical like 50s 40s like American like white man like that
Mm-hmm.
you would like if he would pop up like in your head, and that goes, even though they're both like Jimmy Stewart and Cary Grant are great actors, you still at least for me, I kind of they seem similar in their movies. And like I think Al Pacino is, he plays a lot of the hard characters, kind of like in Scarface. But what I've seen of his in other movies, like there is a similarity with him too, where you're kind of seeing him and you're kind of like, oh, Al Pacino's character, he's probably going to be a gangster-esque type person. But
Mm.
in Scarface, I think while he is, the classic gangster in this film, I just think that, I don't like, usually when we talk about, or when I talk about characters in movies, I just remember the actor name most of the time. Like I don't even remember the character name, and like a week after watching it, like the day after, I probably would.
Hmm.
But like Tony Montana's like a like at this point he's like, I mean, this isn't a similar comparison at all, but he's like a Buzz Lightyear. This is that he's a character that exists outside the movie that you could go buy like an action figure for, like a
Yes.
John Wayne, something like that.
No, I completely agree. It's the character is as the movie is obviously what it is. It's an iconic pop culture phenomenon. But and I think what you're saying, and at least a sentiment that I think and would agree with, is that this larger than life movie has a character that is somehow able to dwarf even that.
Yeah, yeah, it's and I one thing, yeah, I want to mention here just briefly is that, um, well, I guess this isn't exactly relate to what we were talking about, but there was an earlier movie by Howard Hawks, Scarface, and
Mm-hmm.
this is just completely different. Like they turn it from like just kind of a standard, like really old gangster movie, and it's like a gangster movie mixed with a character study. It's like I
Mm-hmm.
cared about like that's another thing that's, I think, great about this film. Like usually I'll be like, oh, I really cared about the plot in this movie more than the characters, or vice versa, or I'll say, oh, this is like a total like character study movie. I think this is like both for me.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. Have because in this film does obviously pay homage to Howard Hawks, and it pays homage to another gentleman whose name I wasn't familiar with, and I'm wondering if it's the writer for the original Scarface or maybe even the lead actor of Scarface, but so you did you see the original Scarface?
Yes, I saw it a while ago.
Would you recommend? I mean, it sounds, or at least I would imagine, and it seems like you were alluding to. I mean, they are very different. This one takes it to a completely different place.
Yeah, that one. I mean, it's from like the original's from like 1932.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like got all those, it's like the old Hollywood,
Mm.
like nothing in Scarface in this film is gonna be in there. So I think you might be disappointed if you were to watch it. I like, this version much better, I have to say, but it's also, more kind of with our times, or what kind of movies we, I think, find interesting in general.
Yeah, I and like ultimately, what some facets that make movies so big a pop culture phenomena is that it feels like it's able to really tap into a time and a place. And like a movie I absolutely adore is Goodfellas, and that feels like it's able to give you the insight of kind of like what the mob was like, in like the I don't know if it's if the time period is like the 70s or not, but around that time period. And it's one that you're like kind of familiar with, but the cocaine trade in like flooding into Florida and Miami is something that, I mean, there are countless documentaries on it. I think Cocaine Cowboys like 1 through 5 are just all about people who have stories to tell about it. And this was probably the first exposure the majority of America really had to, like, this is the inner workings of what is behind that huge infusion of cocaine, which is like, that was a phenomenon in the 70s. I mean, people who went out on the weekends to discotheques were probably familiar with the fact that people were doing cocaine, and this movie is like the behind the scenes of it all, and like shows the gritty nature but also the neon lights of the people who were making all the money on it. So I don't know, it's just, it's such an interesting movie from that perspective, realizing the actual what it is based upon, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. Goodfellas is also one of my favorite movies. And that, like you said, that's a little more about kind of the life, and this is more, uh, a, I'd say it's about, the life of trying to come up as like a boss or a leader
Mm.
in this kind of world, but also it's about the epidemic in, I guess, the 70s or the 80s or whatever it was. Like you said, when the cocaine was like flooding into the Miami area in high volumes. And this is still obviously an issue today. Uh, but it's more like the cartels than it is,
Mm-hmm.
the Cubans, or I mean, I'm sure it's a mix of both. Um, but yeah, like it's a very dark world to be in. I mean, just not even in as like a big dealer. I think just being involved in like the cocaine like trade in any ways is not going to usually lead to great outcomes in general. A lot of it is because those types of people, they're often similar to Tony Montana, and the cocaine is like, it's like people would be like, it's because he uses cocaine that is that way. No, it's like he's that way already, and the cocaine is like a supplement to it. Like that's why he likes it more, because it riles him up, and he has they all have those little pieces that they'll carry around with coke in them,
Mm-hmm.
and just like you can basically do it in public. And I've seen actual people do this in real life, like at bars and stuff. It's they could hide it, and then it's this whole kind of sleazeball culture, I guess, is the best way I think of it. Like
Mm-hmm.
seedy.
Yeah.
Like mixed with it would be like someone, who's very involved in the trade like this could also have connections to like get you a fake passport,
Yeah,
like that kind.
exactly. I know a guy who knows a guy. But
Yeah.
I was thinking the exact same thing, because we see aspects of, I mean, I would imagine perhaps there was, maybe you could make an argument that Tony Montana had not or had tried cocaine before he was, I guess, trying to romance Michelle Pfeiffer's character. But I don't know, with how heavily they use that visual, that was seemingly, at least the way I interpreted it, the first time he used it. And there was so much evidence to that point that he was this very explosive, hot headed character that I, I completely agree with the fact that you said this wasn't making him like that. It was just amplifying a personality that he already possessed. And I think that was one of the misconceptions I came into this movie with, that it would be a tragic drug story where drug use would be his downfall. And I think it was the fact that he let the personality he had just grow and grow and grow, and cocaine was just one of the mixtures that made it grow. Like that was the tragedy of it all, is that he was so egotistical and so driven that he wanted to go up higher and higher no matter what that meant, and would destroy anyone who crossed his path, more so than, oh look, this good guy, this good character started using cocaine and it turned him into a monster. I think it's way closer to the latter than the form, or the former than the latter. I got it mixed up. But he was a bad guy before he ever used the cocaine, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, he like the image that I remembered most just from before watching the movie was him sitting at that desk with the piles of cocaine,
Mm-hmm.
and he's sitting there, kind of about to take his final stand. And so that made me think that that was going to play a big part, like him doing cocaine all the time was going to be a big contributing factor to his downfall. And it's such a side kind of thing. Like you don't even see him do it a lot of the times. You just
Yeah.
kind of see him look down and sniff, and then I would think, oh, he just did some coke. But that's not the point of the movie at all. Isn't really about the drugs. It's just kind of that's what their trade is, and everybody that's involved is doing copious amounts of it, and that's just kind of how it is.
Yeah, exactly. And like, one of the characters kind of says like, "Don't get high on your own supply," and that feels like a foreboding slash foreshadowing moment. And like, yes, obviously, this was able to fuel him so that he could stay ambitious more frequently. I guess just more hours of the day he's gonna pour into this, but it was ultimately, it was like his addiction to, I guess, success, for lack of a better term, or like just wanting to be the guy more than anything, that was his downfall than just drug use.
He comes over, and I think his relationship with his family is a little interesting, and that's something I wanted to ask what you thought about that, because usually there's some sort of struggle for a character like this to where you see them struggling, and then you see, oh, I know why he felt like he needed to get to the top, because he wants to redeem something, or redemption for someone, or get back at someone. But it's just kind of like he wanted to do it, and so he just tried to take what he could.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do wonder, and it strikes me just because of what you mentioned, that maybe, and obviously he had to realize this, and I think it's quite obvious to you and I, being able to kind of watch it from an outside perspective, that he felt like a disappointment to his mother, and this was further disappointing her. But I think he saw, maybe at least, that when I get to the absolute top of this, when I am at the complete zenith, then she'll see that I'm not a failure. I don't know. Food
Yeah,
for thought.
yeah, because
I was gonna ask
he
you your take. Sorry.
oh no, yeah, I was just gonna say he did want to impress her, I feel. um but she wasn't having any of it, obviously. And I yeah, I also, the thing I wanted to ask you about the most, because I didn't really understand how it was a motivating, or I just didn't understand how it fit in with the rest of his character. Um, but like the deal with his sister, what do you think that's all about?
when you say that, like before it began to evolve, or like towards the end.
Well, like what I'm trying to ask is, it feels like there's something weird there. Like either
Ah,
they weren't, well, obviously there's something weird there, but like they either weren't completely like actual siblings, or
uh,
something happened in the past where we just don't know about it, and this was somehow a motivating factor in him doing what he's doing. Like what do you think it was that made him the type of person to literally, I'm just gonna, I think it's an important part, so quick spoiler warning. But shoot his like best friend just
mm,
immediately. Like stuff like that makes you think there's something going on. I couldn't really like pin it down.
yeah, I've thought a lot about that, and I have a theory that I want to throw your way, and get your kind of litmus test on it. But I want to speak to the fact that you mentioned it is a weirdly complicated relationship where, yeah, when they first met, I wasn't sure, is that his sister, was that his sister, or is this like an old girlfriend that came over with his mother, or like maybe even an old wife that he wasn't able, just because it seemed more intimate than just brother sister, I guess. But so I think you might have been like kind of nodding towards that. And if so, I definitely saw that too, and it was a little bit weird. And I would like to get your take on that as well. But what I sensed, from when the partner first kind of indicated any interest in the sister, and then also from the scene where she was in that club that Tony's at the time boss frequented, was that there was a side of Tony that kind of hated himself being there. I think there was a sense of shame that he was wrapped up in this, and I think that comes from what his mother had said about it, and how he was raised, even to take it a step further, that innately he knew that he was kind of a bad guy, for lack of a better term. And I think even though it was his friend, he realized that his sister's ending up with someone just as bad as I am. And I think that's why he reacted so violently.
Yeah, I think that's actually probably, thinking about it, where the movie points me too, in like in a way of trying to understand, because I think that when he's at the club and there's that guy that she's dancing with, um, and he literally cannot do anything except focus on that.
Mm.
So it's this weird combination of some possibly like it's incestual type of feelings, and I think also what you just said about he's embarrassed and he doesn't want her wrapped up in his business, and that club is clearly where a lot of that stuff happens, and he kind of wants her to be away from it. And then when with she's getting with Manny, you just know that that's not going to end well for Manny. Unfortunately, I wasn't sure that was going to happen 100%. I thought it would, but the fact that it happened so quickly, it's just like he has no qualms about keeping her out, is like his number one priority.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then the thing too with him refusing to kill that the mother and those kids in that car, the person they're supposed to assassinate, he has a soft side for family, but that part is developed only like a little, so that it's as if the movie doesn't want you to sympathize with him that much, but just give you hints that he is could have possibly been like a family person, or in the past he might have been like a nicer guy, and something just broke him or something like, along those lines.
Yeah, I as far as the execution with the movie, I think you hit the nail on the head that had they developed that more so, it would have probably been a disservice to the movie, and it would have made him more heroic, and it could have kind of messed up the arc for the ending. So in doing so, I think it was probably the right way to go about it. But I also think it's like just such a poignant moment where that's all you need to kind of look at it and pick up on the fact that that is a line too far for him because that's all he really has at the end of the day. And he even kind of in the dinner scene speaks to that where it's like I have all of this money, I have this wife I think at the time who is a junkie, and like everything I have is hollow, but the only real things in his life is his sister and his mother. And I think that is why he couldn't cross that line.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's it too. And that scene or that sequence is was one of my favorites because I to me, I mean that wasn't the climax of the movie, but I was just very like engaged at that point because I wasn't really sure what he was going to do, and you get to see his rage kind of build up to where he totally he's not thinking at all. Like I knew immediately after they let those guys get away or that family get away that that fact that that beeper was still on the bottom of the car was going to be an issue.
Mm.
And uh he it's just like that's when you see I think that's the I guess best portrayal of the way his uh like emotions or his anger works because at first he's just like he tells the guy we're not going to do it, and then as as it the car scene keeps going on and they're getting closer and he's pressing those buttons, you know, Terry Montana's just getting angrier and angrier and angrier, and then he explodes, and it's like he's still mad at the guy. It's like it was personal. He's like, after he shoots him, he's like still yelling at him. He's like, "You dumb like mf'er," and all this stuff, like as if he was trying to stand up to him when all he was trying to do was make sure that Sosa probably wouldn't assassinate him for not doing the job.
Yeah, exactly. And I think also like looking back at that scene, he he kind of goes through the motions as though like he might think like okay, we'll just do it again. Like we'll try to assassinate him another time, but I think he knew in that when he pulled the trigger that this was the end for him, and I think he wanted that to be the end because he had gotten to a point where it's like you're going to have to step on the heads of a lot of innocent people if you're going to keep climbing this ladder.
Yeah, yeah, and I think he just didn't like being told what to do. It's like
Mm-hmm.
at all, like in any scenario at any point, and if when people did tell him what to do, he would always bicker back at him, and usually it was taken as a kind of lighthearted way a little earlier on, and then as the especially with Frank and Tony's relationship, you see them, and I this is kind of predictable that they were going to have a downfall, but you see slowly and slowly their relationship um, straining because Tony just keeps pushing his I've got to have my way, and it's like no longer a joke that I want to have my way. Like I'm gonna get it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I completely agree with that. Um, and I getting to the climax of this film, I that is one of the top tier action sequences I've ever seen. I mean, just all of the gunfire. Like once they actually start sieging his castle, for lack of a better term, and the "say hello to my little friend" and the freaking I I had seen him say that, and I think I had forgotten that he had a grenade launcher, and I
I
was
did
like,
too.
it was so over the top, but it was like I was enthralled by it to where I wasn't taken out by the fact he had it. I mean, it in a way it kind of makes sense. If you have that much money, I'm sure you could get weapons like high tech grenade launcher type assault rifles, but dude, that was such a badass scene. I absolutely loved it.
Yeah, me too. I mean, I same here. I thought it was a machine gun that he started shooting. I totally was not expecting the grenade launcher, but yeah, it was over the top, but in a good way. Like where like now thinking back on it, I realize how like how well done the I guess you could not choreography, but I guess the way they set up the scene and they do the action. I think, Quentin Tarantino is someone who does that extremely well too. Like when you watch his action scenes and you think about it, you're like, you can think, okay, wow, that was like a really well done action scene. And it may have not even required like, tons and tons of money, um, like giant like explosions, like I'm talking like building destruction, like that would
Mm.
cost like millions to do. Like it felt like it was big in scale, but it was just very well orchestrated, I guess. And the amount of guys that were attacking him, it's like a little miniature army. And I think Frank hints at that earlier in the film when he says something about how Sosa would just send up one of his like hill teams or something along those lines.
Yeah, and how it ends, like it's a really great shot. Um, there was like a slight, I don't even know. It was just like it made me think how there was one person who was supposed to like stand out amongst the soldiers, guerrilla soldiers, for lack of a better term, and he looked like a less muscular version of the Terminator, as he had these sunglasses on, and he was the man to fire the final blow to Scarface, and the shotgun blast. Um, I don't know. Is that the inclusion of him was like? I guess I don't know. You needed someone who was like I don't. I guess maybe he wasn't developed, but if you develop him too much, then it becomes weird. I kind of want to get your thoughts on that character's like his small involvement, but as he falls into the water fountain and you have that "the world is yours" statue. I mean, that was cinematic gold, I have to say. But any thoughts on that character? I mean, I didn't think it was bad. I thought it was interesting, but I was kind of like, oh, okay, that's weird and but neat too, I guess.
I just like I guess like a head henchman type character, but you know, I think that also, you don't like when you think of Sosa's character or any of those upper, guys, they're more like I mean, I guess you could say like intelligent, but they're like sitting around like as if they're like politicians.
Mm-hmm.
And someone it's funny because someone like Tony Montana could never work in a group like that. Like he would want to just kill all of them and just take it for himself. So it's like what level did he even have to go to rise to after where he already was? And I think that character is kind of like Sosa is not, or any of those top guys aren't going to come and show their faces and kill you themselves. Like they're just going to send people to do it for them. And Tony Montana is the type of character that would never do something like that.
Yeah, that is a great point. It's like Sosa and those associates that Montana meets with prior to the setup of the assassination. It's like a mini United Nations, but for drug kingpins, and Montana is the rogue kind of entity amongst them, where he doesn't play well with others, obviously.
Yeah, he's it, it's it's because you think someone like Frank could be one of those people. But you also like I think one of the, main themes or points of the movie is what does it take to I mean, obviously like the overall message is, not to be power hungry and how it can lead to your downfall. But also I think it wanted to like make a statement about what kind of attitude it takes to get to the top of like a I guess drug hierarchy or a hierarchy in general, but in this case like a criminal one. And you see that even someone like Tony Montana who's basically got the manpower just from his weaponry and from his attitude like that he like there's one point in the movie where he's talking about what like Frank's associate who I think ends up being a confidential informant, how he could tell from his face that he's soft. And
Mm.
like, and you look at, and this is another thing about how great Al Pacino plays his character, because you look at Al Pacino and think that guy doesn't look soft at all. Like,
Mm-hmm.
he looks like his face, like you just saw him on the street, you would already think he was bad news just by looking at him. Like, there's no like facade that kind of all the other like Frank Sosa and all those guys kind of have that sense where they look like they could be a business person,
Mm-hmm.
but they're really like a business person, but just for like drugs and assassinations. And like Tony Montana's like not he's not like that at all. But in order to make it to where he did, like he had to have the attitude he did, but it's like you have to mix that attitude with somehow also being like maybe not I don't think smart's the good word, but maybe just business savvy or something like that.
Yeah, and his partner seemingly had a lot of good qualities. Like he seemed way more level-headed, and obviously he made the decision that set in motion the downfall, which I guess is also trying to illuminate that even he didn't have everything put together, and he seemingly was the one who possessed a lot of good qualities, but like he seemed like a genuine good guy. Like out of all of the people Montana worked with, his best friend would be the one. If you had to have your sister marry any of them, he'd be the guy that you would make the exception for, right?
Yeah. I mean, he was a very likable character. There was not really much of anything he did that made me dislike him. He's like funny. He was the reasonable one. He seemed like the type of character to keep Sosa or not Sosa, keep Tony Montana on like some type of reasonable path. Like you don't see a lot of their planning, but I would just assume that that might have been how their relationship worked as they climbed the ladder.
Yeah. And I honestly, I think I maybe slightly overlooked it as I was watching, but I think Montana came to a realization when he got pinched because of the decision his best friend made to trust someone with this money, that it was like, I can't trust anyone now. And maybe he knew, like at the bottom of his heart, he was like, I thought I had the person I needed next to me to succeed. And he had been kind of searching this whole time to put together the perfect team, maybe realizing some of his downfalls. But I think that moment, even before the assassination didn't go through, there could have been a realization on his part that the house of cards has already begun to crumble.
Yeah, I think he might have been trying to get out, um, and and with Tony Montana's sister too.
Mm. Yeah,
But like
I agree with you.
he might have realized, he was too far gone or something like that.
Yeah. Um, I think that it should. I think it's worth exploring the kind of mindset in which a lot of like younger men do idolize a Tony Montana character. They idolize a. I'm trying to think of the Brad Pitt's character from Fight Club. I can't. Tyler Durden. There's like a, and then Travis Bickle is kind of idolized, and I think we touched upon it, but kind of including that whole mass of other iconic characters. These tragic heroes, Jordan Belfort as well. These tragic heroes have this magnetism, this charisma, this larger than life ness that becomes so attractive, in which a lot of people kind of obsess over them and want to be them while overlooking their downfalls. And I think, I mean, why do you think that is? Do you think it's just as simple as they it doesn't resonate the downfall that these characters have?
Yeah, that's interesting because I see that so much. People tend to call that like film bro movies or movies, basically movies that like, teenage boys will like a lot because, they like the characters and then they miss the point of the characters. Um, and my opinion on it is just that. Hold on, I'm trying to think.
I mean, it
So
is such a, no. Go ahead. Sorry, Matt.
Oh yeah, sorry. I was just trying to think of like it's kind of a tricky topic to talk about. But I think that they just relate to the characters like more in their prime. So
Mm-hmm.
like I even think of like a Patrick Bateman too. Like it's like people want not only are like these characters usually like good looking because they're like A-list actors, um, but people relate to like their struggle. I think is like a teenage boy or like a 20s male will relate to the bad parts they have to go through, or these kind of
Mm.
like um all encompassing like very relatable themes in all these movies that it's so universal across cultures that people from other countries can even understand what this character means. And I think maybe it's just that I think a good way to put it is now when you see like a meme or like a TikTok or something of uh like something from one of those films you mentioned. It's always that character like doing kind of in like I was saying in their prime or when they're achieving and they're overcoming their I guess downfall or their struggle in the film. And that's kind of like what gets remembered is their ability, I guess, to overcome whatever struggle they were having, like at Fight Club, just like working a typical office job. And then, you go out and you do this cool thing in your extracurricular time. You have a Fight Club, and there's a lot more to it than just that, obviously. But it's that to me, it's that like, oh, we almost everybody works like a regular office 9 to 5 now. So almost everyone's going to be able to relate to how that can be so monotone and boring. And they're going to want something a little extra in their life or uh, they want something exciting. And it's kind of like for Scarface too. It's just that excitement, I think, that guys especially are driven to the more exciting, or I guess you could say like socially what we would call like masculine ideals that we have like in place for, or that we've kind of created for, what's fun and what is entertaining, but also like it just seems in general, like beyond socially, that like males are more, for whatever reason, like biological reason or something, driven to like engage in like a war, or like being in a drug trade, like a Tony Montana character. Like y there's a reason there is not like a female Tony Montana, you know?
No, I agree, and I think there is importance in like you said, a film bro type of character, because they personify masculine characteristics, like just so over the top, like more than any other character. And it's so easy to glom on to this characteristic that not only you would like to have more confidence, or whatever characteristic they show in spades, but it is, and I think the criticism that a lot of people throw onto these characters that become idolized is that you can easily romanticize the negative aspects. Like if you try to entirely emulate a Tony Montana personality, it is indicative of the fact that you're missing the point, that it is a personality that obviously can take you to where you are going to shut everyone else out of your life. And so I think it's like it can be really useful, especially for younger male audiences, in that, yeah, that is a quality that I want to strive for. And, nuances can get lost on younger audiences. And I do think that is where the point of contention comes from. But just if there was a way to, I guess, just take a step back from it and say, yeah, like I like this aspect of the character. Because I don't know about you, Matt. And I think I can speak to this, but it's really hard to separate one aspect from a character without almost just, you become blinded to the downfalls of a character, especially as you're growing up. You become infatuated with one aspect, and that's really all you think about for that character. And I think that's what happens with a lot of those characters for some people.
Yeah, while you were saying that, I was thinking like the best way for me to think about it is what is everybody remember about Scarface? It's not
Mm-hmm.
his downfall. It's only, the scenes where he's, basically on the come up or on top, or he's, the final scene where he's defending himself like to the grave. That's what people remember about the film, in the same way that those other parts kind of get, I think, forgotten. And like if you see a Scarface like thing outside of the movie, like in music or in like some other type of form of entertainment, it's always going to be talking about, Tony Montana as like a badass, and as it portrays him in a good light. Like no one's taking Scarface and just focusing on the downfall.
Yeah, I agree. And like that is the case with a lot of like film bro movies. I remember the positive scenes much more than the negative scenes. Like Wolf of Wall Street, it's like there are so many scenes as Jordan Belfort is rising that I remember. And I think there's a lot of scenes in which Tyler Durden is like someone that is like, oh, I wish I was as cool as him or I looked like him. It is really weird how psychologically it does become overshadowed. It's like those glorious moments that have become iconic filmography definitely do have a tendency to stick with you longer than, okay, this is how it ends for that character. I think the exception would be Travis Bickle because his entire story was kind of depressing, at least when I watched Taxi Driver.
Yeah, I agree with you there. I was thinking, also when people discuss the movie in general,
Mm-hmm.
or when like an average moviegoer went and saw Scarface, or like an average, guy or teenage guy who goes and sees Scarface, like they're gonna come out of it and love the movie because of those scenes, like the build up scenes and the action scenes, and it'd be something like the older, like their parents, or be like, well, this the moral of the story is actually like blah blah blah, and they're like, I don't really care about that. I just like Tony Montana.
Yeah, exactly. I saw a really neat video essay on this, and it's kind of speaking to the the importance of these characters despite their downfalls. I guess there's a happy medium, but I mean, and I don't know how to put it either. It's a really interesting topic, but it's so nuanced that like I don't know what you tell like younger audience people who do get obsessed with them. Besides, it's like, hey, take the confidence, but don't take the personality, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. I think a lot of it is that. I think that a lot of it is the confidence thing because I think that so I mean, people across the board, guys and girls, are like insecure. Maybe like most, especially, well, I'd say when you're younger. So the people that these movies appeal more towards are going to be people that are generally more insecure because they're not like fully grown up yet. They haven't experienced all of life, and
Mm-hmm.
so this is kind of something they can maybe latch onto, and so they idealize it in a way like I want to be like Tony Montana or one of these other characters, and then you think, well, if you're gonna want to be like Patrick Bateman or Tony Montana, they're literally killers. Like, do you want to
Mm-hmm.
kill people? But then that misses the point of why those people like them in the first place. It's not because of the killing part. It's because of their quite literal, like unwavering confidence. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I think that is what attracts people more than anything else. Because when you see such a charismatic character and you realize that you're not like that at all, and then you see them getting everything they want, you just want that, and then you forget that acting that way can have severe consequences, which it does show in the movie. This is, I think, one of the crux of the reasons why people would say, "Oh, like my kid did really bad thing because they watched this movie or played this
Mm-hmm.
video game." It's that same kind of thing.
I agree, and yeah, it's a really interesting. I think oftentimes it gets scapegoated too. I think you would probably say that. I don't think and this came up in a discussion that I was having with Ethan. We were doing a Tarantino episode and talking about how violence in media, I think it gets scapegoated as well. And I think statistically, and I don't know how, it's definitely in the 21st century, and this is a specific subset of crime, but mass shootings and school shootings specifically, I think they found they actually consume violent media and violent video games at a lesser percentage than the average person in their age group. So I honestly think there's like more either genealogically or upbringing wise that factors in to why people take things to the extreme, and I think that works even on a smaller level. Like, hey, Johnny spray painted the side of the school today, and he got detention because he watched Scarface. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, it's like I've that's actually an interesting statistics you mentioned. I never knew that about the school shooters and consuming less violent media.
Yeah, because I think it's perpetuated that, or like the excuse. I know with Columbine, and that was really, really early on in our lives, but that is the the case study that a lot of I think mythology got perpetuated from, was that these kids were bullied, which I think didn't actually end up being the case, and that they played a lot of violent video games. But just when you actually look at the statistics as a whole, there's not one driving factor. And also, they're not like powder kegs that just, they get a wedgie on Wednesday and then on Thursday they come with a rifle to school. It's something that they usually plan for months, if not years. So first of all, I think it's really important that the knowledge surrounding this gets more is more accessible and people are more knowledgeable on it, but also that the kind of lies that we tell ourselves to make it explainable in our head, it's almost a form of denial. I think we always look for an easy explanation, but those cases are, I think, much more complex than we're willing to admit.
Yeah, I actually used to be like interested in just the psyche behind the Columbine shooters because I was always like that case. It bothered me for some reason, that one in particular, a lot, because it seemed like they were more normal. Like I think they did get bullied, but that wasn't the reason they did it. It was much more than that. And why it was so like I guess what made me so interested in it is just because I couldn't figure out like for so many of these shooter people or mass shooters, there's usually something, you know that there were obvious signs, I guess you could say,
Mm-hmm.
that this could definitely be the case. And there were definitely signs for the Columbine shooters, but there were signs to where like you would just also think maybe this is a bad kid, or this just like a kid that likes violence a little too much. But that's so many that it's so hard to distinguish. You can't just take all those kids that are into like explosives and think they're all going to be mass shooters, because like 99.9999 like percent obviously are not going to be. So
Mm-hmm.
it's what is that little extra thing that pushes them along? I think that obviously the violent media doesn't have anything. I mean, it doesn't really have anything to do with it. Like I know that the Columbine shooters were obsessed with natural born killers, and I've seen that movie, and it's a pretty crazy and very violent movie, but I don't think they would have not done it if that movie didn't exist. That was like a way for them to project what like their fantasy or what they wanted to do, and it's like they could see it on screen, and so it's like they could be like, we're gonna do be just like this because it's so cool here. And
Mm-hmm.
if that movie didn't exist, they probably would have found something different.
Yeah, I think that's a super super valid point. In that it gave them a visual blueprint as to something that they could do. But I think because this was also a case that I was kind of just enraptured by, and like years, like I think a couple decades or a little close to 2 decades afterwards is when I finally started looking into it because I was really young when it actually happened, but I think I'm not sure if it's Eric, but the brunette was kind of like the charismatic leader of the duo, but he had like violent fantasies that were like more Ted Bundy esque than what you would have seen from like I think a Walt Whitman who was the original Texas bell tower shooter, where he clearly had like he was a sociopath, like and I think took pleasure or at least mentally wanted to inflict pain on people and wanted to have power over people. And that movie, I think, was, like you said, there would have been an inspiration elsewhere had it not been that film. And I think he would have done equally as much damage another way if it wasn't that way as well. But and I also think another thing is that there was actually they were on the radar of local law enforcement, and it was still able to slip through the cracks. So when it comes to taking it to the nth degree, I don't think the movie is really to blame. I think the freedom of expression when it comes to films like this is needed because there will probably be a lot more people who not only don't do anything negatively because of this, but also are like it gives them some type of role model, and as they mature, are able to kind of separate the characteristic from the character.
Yeah, so I have 3 points I want to talk about. First is that you mentioned the Texas tower shooter. There's actually a cool movie called I haven't seen it yet. It's called Targets, and it's about that.
Mm.
And also I if I remember right, I watched a short documentary I think about it, and he actually had some like tumor that grew, I think, all of a sudden, and he basically turned like his brain turned psychotic or it completely
Oh,
changed over the course
Whitman,
of
right?
yeah, yeah, and so that's why he went up there and did that. Um,
Yeah, I think he wrote in his will that he wanted his head examined after the atrocity because he was having terrible headaches, and that makes a lot of sense that there would be a tumor that was probably pressing on something and caused it.
yeah, and then another thing, so I was gonna mention again the Columbine shooters. I think, this is just my theory, but I think that, and this is the case for a lot of those types of shooters too, if there's not something else like, a tumor or they have an obvious psychological disorder, excluding someone being like a sociopath or psychopath, because I think that's very hard to say for sure if
Mm-hmm.
someone is. Unless I'm saying like after they've died, like it's hard to go back and be like, this person was
Yeah.
for sure. But but you can often do that with something like schizophrenia. But what I was gonna say, I think it's a mix of probably having antisocial personality disorder traits combined with being a nobody at your school, or when you're like 14 or 15 or however old they were when they were in high school and they started being friends. Like they were probably like the more outcast kids, and a lot of the times like people like that don't handle it well, and it leads to them doing things to try and maybe you know get involved with like the popular kids or whatever, however you want to call it, and then them trying just leads to them getting rejected more, and it's like they build up resentment against the entire school. They just like hate the school, like they wanted
Mm-hmm.
to like bomb the school, like
Mm-hmm.
it was like a like they were upset with society in general for like they thought that they had failed them, as if like they deserve it. It's a very weird mentality that I think that is just something that like people that don't fit in as well and also have like violent tendencies and maybe around that high school age are prone to getting trapped in. And then the last point I wanted to say is you were talking about how people like took inspiration from like Scarface, and one thing that I noticed right after the film ended, because well, actually, it was during the film, because sometimes I'll have points where they'll say a line in the film, and I'm like, that's a sample in this song that I listened to,
Mm-hmm.
and it happened in this film. There's this point where he's yelling. It's when he's in the hot tub, and Manny, his partner, tells him, he's like, you know what, like your wife, she's right. Like you are an asshole, man, or something like that. And I was like, that's a like an opening sample in this one like Chief Keef song I like. And then I went back and I started looking more at like Chief Keef's like songs or like names from some of his songs and some of his other lyrics, and I was like, he's taking a lot from Scarface. I didn't realize it. So it's like one of those things where you know they just have this character where they're like, you know, this guy has a bunch of cool machine guns and is super violent, and I'm the same way. So you know, I would idolize him.
Yeah, I thought the same thing. Because like I've listened to, you know, a decent amount of rap, and I was like, okay, so they got Sosa from this, they got Yayo from this. It was like this movie is so intertwined with the cocaine culture that it actually, and maybe I don't. I'm not 100%. Maybe Yayo predated this movie, but I think if I'm not wrong, it definitely got popularized by the use of, you know, obviously the name. I think specifically is it a Chief Keef song where it's like they use a different name for girls, but Love
Yes,
Sosa.
yes, yeah.
I
That's like his
think
most famous song. Yeah.
I think that's specifically in reference to the Sosa character. I could be wrong, but I'm imagining that's where that comes from.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah.
And then, like, I don't know, have you ever heard people say yayo? Like, I remember, like, people in G Unit, when that I used to listen to them as a little youngster all the time. Definitely, I was probably a little young to be listening to it, but they would say stuff about yayo all the time. I didn't know what the hell they were talking about, and later figured it out. But it wasn't until I saw this movie that I was like, okay, they call cocaine yayo in this. I wonder if that was like where it begun to be called that in popular culture, and I feel like it's probably very likely.
Yeah, I feel like with how iconic this movie is, it's almost like absurdly because of it. Because you know, I think this time period was around the same time, you know, the 80s, maybe the early 80s and 70s when like cocaine started to really come over. I'm not 100% sure on like when like the big drug narcos guys in South America were huge, you know, like Pablo Escobar. I'm not sure exactly when that was, but I think it was around the 80s. So
Mm-hmm.
I think this would go hand in hand with with Coke becoming super popular and the term too.
Oh, I agree with you. And then I want to touch on one point that you made, kind of to backtrack a little bit back to the Columbine thing, and just kind of expand or take your one of your points a step further, uh, where you were kind of you're talking about a resentment because they weren't like accepted by the cooler kids. I think specific to the Columbine cases is that they were like upset in general that they weren't just almost naturally revered, and there was a sense that they weren't getting something that they deserved. And I don't even know if it stems from ever putting themselves out there to be rejected. I think they're like in a sick way. I don't know if it goes for Eric, but I think like the ringleader kind of, or I guess the thought, the dominant personality amongst the duo felt as though he was owed something by society and they didn't see him the way he saw himself, which I think is boiled down into exactly with what you said, but that in doing this, you know, terrible thing, they would have to then look at them completely differently after the fact, and that this would right the wrongs that society had on them. Because I know there's a lot of like conflicting statements that came out. As I think amongst their group they were fairly popular, but there was like football players who were probably like local celebrities at their school, and I don't know, I don't believe, at least from what I've, you know, read and listened to, that they were ever like severely bullied. I just think they saw that group and felt as though that should be them without having to actually be good at a sport or be smart or be extra charismatic. You know, like that they were owed that without having to put in the work, so to speak. And this was the easy way, the way I look at it at least. It, you know, just, well, we're going to tear down the school, essentially. We're going to blow it up. And then all of these dumb thoughts they have are going to be, you know, we're going to prove them wrong, which is, I think, you know, there was not caring, lack of empathy on their part, but like a twisted sense of self importance from that duo. And sorry for taking us on a tangent. It just, that spurred a thought that I wanted to get out there and see what you thought.
Oh no, it's fine. I like it's been quite a while since I've like read about this or read about Columbine, but I used to read it. Just I found it fascinating, I guess, in like a morbid way. Like I also like true crime stories. But yeah, like from what I know and remember about it, um, that I think you're kind of on the money. You know, we can't say for sure, obviously, but I think that they did feel like they were owed being. You know, I think a lot of it probably comes from not like getting female or attention from girls when you're in high school is like so important to you then that they probably also like were rejected by a lot of girls. So it's probably that combined with the general feeling of them feeling like they're losers, and then they do like feel like they deserve it. And like I remember they had like journals that you could read, and I think I read some of them, and the way that I remember their entries like reading was that they were actually just like very like depressed, and they did feel like they were owed, I guess, because they were obsessed with like natural selection, but it wasn't like the what natural selection actually is. It was like um the version that the Nazis created, where it's like
Mm,
some people are deservingly like actually better than others because of their race, which people scientifically debunk that as being true, or some people will like live longer, do certain things because of certain, I guess, genetic factors. And so they were, I think, kind of trying to, I guess, by destroying the school, I think they just wanted to take everyone else's opportunity away because they also, I guess, felt like the school had taken it from them, which, you know, it's obviously irrational and totally like what we would call now an edgy, like 16-year-old way of thinking. Like, no one deserves to live, and just this very like nihilistic,
Mm-hmm.
but like but also not what if you've because I was a philosophy major, so I have studied nihilistic philosophers, or and nihilism is usually not, it's not supposed to be taken just that the world is, you know, a bad place. It's that if you basically assume the world is like this bad thing, you're supposed to use that as a way to overcome that and try and build your life in a positive way. That's kind of
Mm-hmm.
what the philosophy is, but it gets misconstrued by like people like the Columbine killers who say, you know, we're nihilists, and it's just very it's upsetting.
Yeah, I agree. And I think the misinterpretation of the boiled down and perverted version of the Nazi German philosophy. We actually, do you remember when I brought up Nietzsche, and I brought up, I think, what the Nazi inspiration was, and I think what I had thought wrongly was that you can do bad things, but because you're born like you're a select good person, and I don't, the determination, like you said, can be any meaningless things such as your race or gender or whatever, that it can't be, a good person can't do a bad thing. And I could see that being a huge kind of flaw in the thinking of people who commit those terrible acts.
Yeah, that was, I think you asked me about the Ubermensch
Mm-hmm.
the last time. And yeah, it's just, you know, people interpret it incorrectly. I guess kind of like, you know, the film bro movies we were just discussing. They just kind of take what they want out of it, and they don't really see the entire thing. Because a lot of the times, I guess it's easier to, that idea that like nothing matters in nihilism is more intriguing, and it sells better than the full story.
Yeah, and I think it requires much more effort. I think, like you said, it's easier. It takes much more effort to actually think about it and understand it, and most importantly, actually to put it into action. Whereas if it's like you can literally live in denial if you have the pseudo nihilistic thought that nothing matters. So then that is an easy step to take from there. Then why even try? And I think that's people trying to like save themselves from failure and attachment and pain that comes with actually doing things that are meaningful.
Right. Yes, people don't want to do the take action part. They just like to learn about the easier stuff and then use that as a reason to, as like an excuse, you know, to not do something.
Matt, let me ask you. I think we covered a lot of the super important parts. Was there anything else that you wanted to discuss for Scarface?
No, I think that's about it.
I think we hit all the major, or checked all the major boxes. I want to ask you, what did you rate Scarface?
So thinking about it, I think I'd give it a 4.5. I initially rated a 4, but it's kind of grown on me a little more.
Yeah, I have to say, like, I loved this film. I gave it a 5. It's very rarely do films like on the first watch just strike a chord with me so much. I just thought visually I loved the neon look of this. It's iconic, it's quotable, and like the action. So like a lot of aspects that I enjoy most in film were done really well in this. So this is like one of my new favorites now.
Yeah, yeah. I got to give it to the sets. Their houses, the 80s style was very cool.
I agree. The next one I think will lead to some really good conversation as well, and that is the Blowout. This is led, or the lead actor is John Travolta. It's about a sound tech, I guess would be the job title for like B horror movies, who's trying to capture sounds that he needs for his latest project, and not only audioly records a car crash, but also sees a car crash and saves the passenger. And this gets him caught up in a conspiracy in which a governor presidential candidate is killed, and John Travolta's kind of mission to expose this whole conspiracy behind it. Any plot points that you think I missed that are worth mentioning?
No, that sounds like a good description.
So let me just off the bat ask you one of the comparisons I had heard, comparisons, and also someone who De Palma, I think, was often trying to pay homage to, from what I read, is Hitchcock. Had you heard anything like that yourself?
Yes, I think it's some reviews I read, people mentioned that, but it's definitely pretty obvious from the movie that he's inspired by Hitchcock.
Yeah, I agree. Like I think there's literally a shower scene which is a direct homage, but this mystery feels very much inspired by the type of mystery you would get in a Hitchcock film. And it was, this was the first film of the ones I've seen from De Palma where I finally did see the Hitchcock. Because I, and maybe you have an example, but like, Scarface, doesn't feel inspired by Hitchcock. Carrie, that's a film I think we both seen where there might be some Hitchcock in there. It's been a while since I've seen it, but it wasn't immediately apparent to me. This is the first one that it was really clear cut that, he's a fan and trying to emulate that style of storytelling.
Yeah, it. I agree. I think I've seen the same amount of De Palma movies as you. I think it's just Carrie and these two. Maybe I'm forgetting one, but yeah, this felt like this is like a thriller, like slash mystery type film, and that's basically exactly what Hitchcock does. And there's another, I was actually reading about this movie, and there's another film by this Italian director. I'm sure you heard Antoinini. I don't know how to say his name. I've never been able to pronounce it.
Oh
Called
yeah.
Blowout or Blow Up, and I didn't care for that movie very much when I first saw it, but I've been meaning to rewatch it because I feel like I just didn't get it, and I did like this film. So I feel like I probably, and I like other films from Antoine, whatever his name is, also.
Antonini, is that?
Yeah, Antonini, something like that.
And that one's, I haven't watched it. I think I've read the summary. It's similar from the aspect that it's a photographer who didn't mean to, but inadvertently captured a critical part of a crime, right? And that's the tie that this movie specifically and that movie are really similar, right?
Yes, and just a couple of other movies that this reminded me of. Just I think it's just because the way the lead character acts. Nightcrawler. Have you seen that film?
Oh yeah, I'm a big fan of that film.
It's like they're different, but it's almost like they have and also Peeping Tom. It's like they all have this weird obsession with like something, and they're using like a device to eh, capture it. Do you know kind of like that it's kind of vague, but they kind of are all similar in a way.
No, I agree. I think like the utilization of a piece of equipment like that being paramount to the movie definitely there's clearly a link, and I agree with you. And also kind of it didn't go super deep. One of the examples I often bring up where I just love this aspect of it is Moneyball, where the film, and also I think The Big Short is another example of this, where it's like a crash course that makes you feel more knowledgeable on the subject. And this had some doses of that, where getting to see the nuts and bolts of sound design was actually like kind of cool to see in a film. And that was one of the kind of standout aspects of this film for me.
Yeah, I love, like, one of my favorite things is when movies do that, and I see this in a similar light when movies teach you about a real event.
Mm,
Um, and it's so it's kind of like you feel like you're learning something, and it's also really entertaining. And one of my favorite movies I've watched more recently that was like that was The Insider, and it kind of taught me about the big tobacco industry and how they tried to cover up that smoking caused cancer scientifically. Um, and it's just so you can kind of make parallels to the real world, and yeah, I liked that because I used to be interested in like music production and stuff like that, so getting that's very different than what they're doing here, but just the electronics and the, I guess at this time it'd be like analog sound machines are super. I love that kind of stuff.
yeah, and it gives you, I think, like you, the royal you, aka like the royal we, like me specifically, I will say, a completely new respect, especially for this time period, as to like lining up the sound and how difficult a task that would be. Because it's like you're almost taking like a tape cassette, like an audio tape, and trying to line that up with a visual, like the film that you would need. And I can't imagine how freaking painstaking that would be for a movie, let alone like a video like is trying to be done by John Travolta's character.
Yeah, it made me. It was funny because even when I was rewatching, and I remembered everything that happened in the movie, which kind of made the rewatch. It's definitely more of a fun first watch, I just say. But I remembered at the beginning, when they're uh, discussing the scene and how they're going to need a new scream. How often that in movies they dub stuff, and it's done so well that we don't even realize it, and then you think, okay, like now, like usually I would think in a modern sense, okay, like that's kind of easy to line it up in like a program, a computer program, when you just move the audio file
Mm-hmm.
and the video file and sync in like Adobe After Effects. But back then, like in the 80s and even more so, like in the 50s was probably, maybe even harder to just be able to physically put that stuff together and make it work. Like the amount of trial and error, I imagine, was was probably just very tedious.
And there was like just a, I think one scene, and it felt like it was like trying to kind of highlight the artistic nature to what I looked, or what my brain went to, was how what it would be called cartoons now, where he was trying to put pictures of the car crash in order and take photos to put on a reel, like how you would have the like picture cutouts for, like, I think South Park was one of the last ones to do this, where it was actual cutouts that you would have to take each shot and fill in a different cutout for each one. That was another just one little scene that I really appreciated and felt like De Palma. in some way was trying to like highlight and show his love for these often overlooked pieces of cinema and media as a whole.
Yeah, I think, thinking more and more about it just from the De Palma movies I've seen, he like I guess you could say he wears his inspirations like on his sleeve or on his face or whatever the term is. Because like the only like the first thing you see when Scarface ends that I noticed immediately was that, it was dedicated to Howard Hawks. And in this film, like it's obviously super inspired by Hitchcock. Like he makes really great movies that it's kind of he has his own vision, obviously, but like every film, like there's some kind of obvious inspiration if you've watched a bunch of movies. So you could tell he was clearly very into like probably, cinema and other types of like art history.
I agree. One of the aspects of the story that I did like was the kind of serial killer slash cover up aspect. And I forget. I knew the actor's name as I was watching it. I remember I kind of nudged my girlfriend and I was like, "That's so and so," and I can't remember who plays that serial killer. But that was a really interesting aspect, and Hitchcock has a tendency to kind of do that too, where the main villain does seemingly, he has the attitude about killing that does seem to tie very well into what you would expect from a serial killer. But I liked how that was put into the plot.
Yeah, that was John Lithgow, I think. Or
Yes,
Lithgow.
Lithgow.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I like that too. I like because that's why this movie, like for me, was very fun on the first watch, more so than a rewatch, just because that mystery conspiracy part is was the fun part, like the best part for me about my initial watch of the movie, because it was what I guess kept me on my feet. The like the kind of Hitchcock suspense.
Yes. One thing, and by no means do I want to sound hypercritical, but I think it's worth kind of getting like feeling out your thoughts on this. Is that while it clearly pays homage to Hitchcock, and to preface it, I've really only seen Hitchcock at his best. I've seen 6 of his films, and none of them have been like rated poorly by the average person or rated poorly by me. So, I mean, it's a small sample sizing of his best work. But this film, whether it be, it might just be boiled down to some psychology of the characters or actual details, but it did feel slightly less thought out compared to Hitchcock, because I've watched Hitchcock films. Dial M for Murder is a prime example of this, where I was just incredibly impressed by how well thought out it was. And there was some shortcomings on this film where I didn't feel the same way. And I wonder, I mean, is that a sentiment that you share, or were you also, was it something that didn't really, you didn't think about very much?
Um, for me, I feel like Hitchcock is kind of the master when it comes to what this type of movie is trying to be.
Hmm.
And yeah, so I think my favorite Hitchcock movie is probably Rear Window. Have you seen that one?
I love Rear Window.
Yeah, I think like in terms of, being what something a well thought out movie, I think that is from I think I've seen 4 or 5 Hitchcock films. That's probably the one I think does it the best. That one is it's like the story is and the way it unfolds is just brilliant. It's so unique. And like I agree that this film like I could probably rewatch Rear Window and enjoy it more than this rewatch just because I feel like there'd be more to maybe even unpack for a second watch. Whereas here, I kind of knew what happened, and the kicker to me in this film is the very end. Like that's kind of what grabs me. Like the very last scene.
Okay, and this is something that I think I need to talk to you about cuz I thought that there was an interpretation of the ending where I was like that would really be the kicker, that I'm like, okay, I really like what he did there, but I was kind of unsure as to whether that was the case. And but I need to get your thought process. Do you think Travolta almost purposefully let the the love interest, quote unquote, perish so that he would get the sound?
Yeah, that's like what made me like this movie so much. Like when I first saw that last scene, because it brings it's like when movies do that kind of thing, it's not really like a twist. I guess it is a twist. At the very end, they're kind of like it makes you rethink the whole film. And so like I start going back and I'm like thinking about all the scenes and what he did, and I think like how he seemed super exploitative for some
Mm-hmm.
reason, like the way his character acted. Like even though he did seem to, like her, it seemed like he didn't really care about her. He cared more about solving this puzzle. And like he just wanted to solve it. But like maybe not for like fame or I don't even know why, but I feel like maybe his intentions were wrong. So that's kind of what makes me think that yeah, maybe. But I mean, when I think about the film, it does seem like he's trying to stop that. But I guess just the whole way it's formulated, that's the interesting part to me. It's like he, because that's the first part of the like first sequence and last. So it really does that interesting thing where it kind of leaves you questioning.
See, okay, so because I kind of thought that, and then I was just trying to like replay some of the scenes in my head, because I think in the movie he uses that sound, and then he seems kind of pained by it, but I think if you look through, that's the most interesting lens to look at it through, is that he either willingly or maybe willingly is the best way to go about it, because one of the points that really stuck in my craw was when she went to meet who they thought was the TV anchor, who ended up being John Lithgow. I was thinking, why wouldn't he be in the station and kind of like be able to have eyes on her, as because immediately you're like, this is a really dumb idea. Like she's completely on her own now. You have no way to communicate with her. So this bad thing, once it's set in motion, like you're just kind of screwed.
Yeah, like to me that goes more towards like I interpret him kind of as this like I think that's why I made that comparison to like Nightcrawler and Peeping Tom like when we first started discussing this movie, because they're like it's like they're addicted to this weird like thing, like whether that be like taking pictures and stuff and like having the pictures, and his is like solving the mystery but also like recording things and sound, and like he just wanted to listen to what was going on when they were, in the train station. And it was like he did seem concerned, but he was also, it's not like he was expressively enjoying himself listening, but he's just got his character is played in a way where I think this guy like has bad intentions here, and maybe he in a way is getting off to this kind of thing with the sound.
And I think the his background when he worked with the police might have been why he got out of that work, because you're led to believe he got out of it because that was such a traumatic experience, but it might have been like an awakening for him, and you know what I mean, and put him on a course to where he would try to kind of replicate it the way he does in this film.
Yes, he's like someone that strikes me as very obsessive.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially when you like how many tapes he has in his office. It's like, and that that kind of profession, I would imagine you have to be like locked in and super organized and on top of everything to be able to be successful at it.
Yeah, yeah. But also, I feel like like, I feel like his, you could say his romantic connection was with like his tapes, and in this case, the investigation.
I agree. I agree with you. I have to say, and like I asked the question whenever I posted my review, because I couldn't fully convince myself of that ending, but I was like, man, the idea of that is a really intriguing avenue to go down. And I should know to usually, if there is a director who has proven how good they are, you gotta kind of give them the benefit of the doubt if it's in between one or the other. This movie works way if you look at that character through this lens, everything adds up way more appropriately. So I honestly, I think I got lost in the twist to where I was still believing that Travolta was this good guy, but like you said, there are so many signs that point towards him almost manipulating situations to get it to go in that direction. Like keeping her from leaving and going to the train station. It it sounds like he's trying to save her, but if you think about it, she would definitely be safer if she didn't stay.
Yeah, that, the whole time, after I knew what was gonna happen on the rewatch, I was thinking in my mind like how she just needed to, be done with this already. And then I kind of ended up seeing, John Travolta's character is more of a manipulator because I already kind of knew what was happening. And I guess that's kind of the cool part about this movie for me, is that it can be watched two different ways, and it's still a good movie. But if that last scene didn't happen, like this movie would just be like a straight cut, like thriller, crime kind of conspiracy movie. But with the twist, it makes it more. Even it can turn it into a character study of the main character too.
Yeah, I agree. And a very perverse main character for sure. Like, and with this, no, I guess Peeping Tom would be the first to do it, but this is just putting like an updated spin on things and a more realistic spin on things too, because I think I love Peeping Tom and I think it is well executed, but it's a little bit, they're both a little bit impractical, but just like literally the equipment needed for Peeping Tom to be realistically done is slightly more impractical than this type of situation.
I think I would say Rear Window is kind of the best of both worlds, maybe.
Yeah, yeah, I agree with you there. Yeah, I'm glad I was able to get your perspective on that. And that was probably my main objection for discussing this film, because like just that, I was like, the site, why would they make those decisions? But if there's actually intentions and reasoning beyond what I immediately captured, that like having that explanation and it be like he's kind of a dark mastermind makes it all the better. And I kind of want to ask you, and it's nothing that we would ever be able to definitively say, but Travolta had worked on a couple other films with this company. Do you think that this has been something that he has done time and time again? Like he tries to capture kind of these morbid, I guess, recordings, for lack of a better term.
You mean, does De Palma as a director, like, is he interested in like certain unique? Oh, sorry. Just can you just say what you were kind of repeat the question?
Yeah. Do you think Travolta had ever, like, that character prior to us following his story? Do you think he would have ever kind of used nefarious tactics like this on the films he worked on prior to this one?
Oh, I thought you were talking about Brian De Palma. That's why I got confused. Yeah, I think that's it seems like he would have been doing this type of thing for a long time because the way it shows how like obsessed how he collects the tapes and whatnot. I think that's just his thing. I think that the way his character is supposed to be portrayed is like he's not one of those people that just has no life. He's someone that like has no life just because he's only focused on one single thing. Like if you're viewing the movie and in this, way that he's so focused on and obsessed with like recording or and making films. I guess listening to the audio, it's like this weird uh like state of mind for him that he gets into, kind of like a obsessive again. It's just the word you would use for it. But yeah, it's just like that's like his thing, and that's like all he does because that's what brings him joy. And there's just some people that have stuff like that.
Yeah, and I think another thing that kind of separates him from like a nightcrawler is that it feels compulsive, that he doesn't he he seems pained by it in the end, both whenever he's holding that girl and also as the scream plays, because it seems like he's reliving it and he's unhappy about it, but at the same time was he exploited the situation nonetheless.
Yeah, he's like, so I guess voyeurism or being
Mm-hmm.
voyeuristic would be the best term. That's kind of like same thing with like a peeping tom, but it's like he gets maybe an obsession and addiction not just with the recording aspect, but being involved with other people. Like at the very beginning of the film when he's recording sounds for a movie. Now you think back and you're like, well, on the initial watch before the ending, you really think he's, working on the film, but now you realize, okay, he probably goes out there and does that all the time,
Mm.
and he spies on people. Like that's he gets off to spying on people, and those tapes are probably like personal, private things for like other people that he's like gathered.
Exactly. Um, I think that's a really interesting point, that it is very much in line with that character, and it makes him like way less of a heroic protagonist that you're kind of led to believe he was. Let me ask you this, Matt, because I think this is also, this spurs the question, well, while I'm looking at it through this kind of new lens. Had Travolta, if he had the opportunity to stop the murder prior, do you think he would have? Or do you believe he almost set this plan in motion so that there wouldn't be a way for him to save her, as a way to protect, obviously, the sympathetic side of his self while also fulfilling the voyeuristic side of himself.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know, but like I keep making when I'm thinking about this film, I keep making the connections to Nightcrawler in my head, and it's getting weird to where I think that movie had to be incredibly inspired by this one, because I think that he goes out and he gets these photos of Nightcrawler and he's selling them to like news agencies. And you can now think of it as how many times has he gone out and recorded and possibly also recorded things that have happened and tried to turn him in like this in the past. Maybe he hasn't, but he also, goes here and reports the story and then but then he can't stop trying to solve it on his own. And it's like the fact that no one believes him reinforces him to continue down this path even more. And then when you get to him saving her, I don't think we have an answer to if he really wanted to or not. Because I feel like, the shot of her dead, you feel like he does feel bad for her. And then when he covers his ears in the last scene and he can't listen to her scream, you get a sense that he probably did have some feelings that I think the movie may lean a little more towards he would have saved her, but I'm not really 100% sure.
Yeah, I'm with you. I don't know for certain either. I feel like I am kind of rediscovering aspects of this movie that I did they didn't click because I didn't fully explore it through this lens. But like now that we're kind of diving into it, I enjoy the John Lithgow character even more because I think he parallels John Travolta's character in a weird way, that he needs to mentally protect himself, that he's committing the murders because he needs them as a cover up. But it's like he's protecting himself from his actual dark desires with that facade. Like he has to lie to himself because he can't fully accept that he probably just wants to actually murder women.
Yeah, it's like he's acts like he's creating the Liberty Bell killer or whatever they called it by becoming a serial killer, but he's tricking himself into saying, "Oh no," and this is how a lot of serial killers are pretty much, not all of them, but I think most of them. It's like an escalation. He
Mm-hmm.
wanted to blow out this guy's tire, and maybe that would kill him, and then he does end up killing him, and then, oh, now I have to go cover up. Well, let me go like kill this other person, but then that just leads to having to kill more people. But for him, it's just like, well, I'll just kill all these people to cover up the fact that I was gonna like kill someone else. And it's just like, no, you just, that's how a lot of serial killers think. Like that's basically what you are.
And you touched on like a really important aspect, the escalation, which is so true because I think a lot of serial killers, their first kill sometimes is accidental, just the same way as John Lithgow's. I think potentially one of the most famous examples is I think John Wayne Gacy, where he had a younger gentleman with him. He thought the kid was trying to kill him. He was bringing him breakfast in bed, and he thought he was going to use the knife to kill him. So John Wayne Gacy ended up killing in self-defense and realized this was like what his purpose. It was like it was the thing that he was chasing the rest of his life. So that is a really interesting aspect that De Palma touches on.
Yeah, yeah. And also, I think there's a political aspect here that we see a lot of news and that sort of thing. I wanted to get your take too because I wasn't 100% sure if he was like trying to say anything, but it might have just been one of those things that was current to the times of I guess when did this movie come out? The late 70s that we might not fully click with.
Yeah, I think and with the specifics of the political, are you referring to kind of the cover up of the girlfriend, or like how mudslinging was kind of done back then?
Um I think I'm more talking. I mean, there's like the level of the conspiracy for covering it up, but there was also a lot of shots that I saw of, and they're discussing the local or how the politics, and it was the kill in the first place was of that guy's political competitor,
Mm-hmm.
but then it also seemed like he was playing newsreels in the movie that looked like they were from like real life, but I wasn't quite sure.
Yeah, he did. He did a really good job. Anytime like the news was on the television, I don't like. Well, a movie I was talking to you about that I had seen recently was it's called Knock at the Cabin. There's news played in that, and like it looks similar, but I mean you kind of know watching. It's like, okay, like that doesn't directly parallel any real news channel I've seen. But when the news came on in this movie, it did seem it was like really realistically done.
Yeah, yeah, I think he might have also just in general been trying to make a statement about corruption in politics, possibly.
Well, like the whole Kennedy stuff is what my mind goes to. And that might like I think Bobby Kennedy might be very timely for when this movie came out. And I know, Sirhan wasn't directly tied to like the Republican Party, because I think Bobby was also a Democrat, but I would have to agree with you. I feel like there might be a statement on how oftentimes like there would be kind of political assassinations in America, and I think he might have been trying to highlight that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
That's that would I the timeline I'd have to look that up because I'm not sure when RFK passed, but if it was like within 5 years, I feel like De Palma would probably be trying to make a statement with that. But I mean, there's always kind of behind. I mean, there's always trying to get audio and pictures and trying to have these salacious details come out, and yeah, I would agree. I mean, and it's almost a well-known fact at this point that politics are super dirty. And I think another example would be probably Watergate would have been really close to when this came out.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Because that would kind of make sense in the same sort of cover up aspect.
Yeah, and also, am I correct? Wasn't Watergate were they trying to tap the phones of a of I who the Democratic nominee?
Yeah, yeah, I think they took I'm pretty sure a group of people broke into headquarters and or someone broke in and stole uh something and I think that what they stole had like evidence of maybe Nixon or his administration bribing people. I can't quite remember.
I uh I should be ashamed of myself because I watched the movie All the President's Men like I think less than a month ago, but I forget what the actual scandal was besides Nixon being involved. But Yeah, for some reason, I feel like there was some wiretapping element to it. And if you just think kind of that whole, this political conspiracy on top of like the subliminal messaging of seeing Travolta trying to listen for details, I honestly, like, you know what I mean? Like on a subvert, like,
Yeah.
you know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? Like it almost comes together like in the back of your mind in a certain way.
Yeah, it does. And I think that that was probably just, I guess, the spin he put on the movie, maybe due to the cultural times. Because I mean, this was like came out in the early 80s or late 70s, and pretty sure Watergate happened in like early to mid 70s, so it wasn't that uh, far removed.
Yeah, exactly. One thing again, I have to say, I don't think it was nearly as prevalent in this film, especially in comparison to Scarface, but really like vibrant color palette for this film, and I enjoyed that quite a bit.
Yeah, I was gonna say I really liked, there were some shots, mostly the bridge ones, where it looked kind of like they were on a set, but it looked like they weren't. And just the way it looked very cool. I don't really know how to like describe how it looked besides that I just enjoyed it. Do you know which ones I'm talking about?
The bridge shots, is that when they would kind of flash back to the car
Yeah.
crash?
Or like when he's standing on the bridge and it's in the background and you see people walking in front. I just like, and there's a couple different angles where like it's like you can see in more dimension or like more directions than you normally could with the camera. That's like the best
Oh,
way to describe it.
yeah, those types of shots are like I love those types of shots as well. Yeah, I don't even know how to describe it. I would imagine I don't even know. It's focused, but your peripheral is like expanded. Is that kind of
Yes, yeah.
yeah, I don't know how they accomplish those shots, but I love the use of it. The fireworks scene at the ending, is that kind of another example of that?
Yes, yes, that's like what I'm thinking of.
I love those shots. They're not utilized very often, but it was used really, really well in this film.
Yeah, and I mean I think, my favorite part besides I just especially from watching it the first time, remembering how much I enjoyed certain parts was, that fireworks scene or that part where he's trying to save her because, on first time around i- it's so interesting, I guess, to me after the rewatch now how differently you view it on the first time because you really think that he's trying to go save her, and now you're not too sure after on the second time. But I think that scene is I really like how they're up on the building. I don't know. I just think it reminds me of like a cool action movie where people are fighting on top of a building.
Yes, yeah, and you know, super well executed. Matt, I want to
Eh,
ask you. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say it's kind of like displayed in front of the American flag, and another like politics thing that I felt like he kept putting in there. But yeah.
Yeah, I wonder if it's the like what the messaging is like precisely, but I think it is probably speaking to that there's a lot of victims, unintentional victims for the types of tactics that are used politically. That I think that's the way I kind of look at it. Like a lot of people end up their lives are worse off because of these political games that are played.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's probably right.
Matt, is there anything additional that you want to cover?
No, I think that's it.
What would you rate the blowout?
I gave Blowout 4 out of 5 stars.
So, so my initial rating was a 3.5. I was on the fence, and I think with this knowledge, I'm definitely closer to 4 out of 5. I'll probably sleep on it, but I think because it's a way more surface level film. If you're not look to me at least for my enjoyment, when I wasn't like 100% sure if the that whole twist ending was intentional or not. But that it makes so much more of the decisions made feel impactful. And also my only big criticism was that it didn't feel well thought out when I look at it through that lens, those all of the decisions do feel very calculated. So I think with this knowledge and after having this conversation, I think I'm at a 4.5 as well. Did you enjoy watching De Palma?
Yeah, yeah. Of the last few, I don't know if it's hard to choose a favorite out of like Paw and De Palma and oh, who else have we done recently?
Did
Uh,
Cassavetes?
Cinemo. That's what I was trying to think of.
Oh yeah, Michael Cimino.
Cimino. Yeah, I was trying to think of who would I choose my favorite, but it's kind of hard. I kind of like all of them.
Yeah, and what also makes it difficult is like De Palma has one of the movies we watched is like an iconic film. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
But I guess I mean, you could argue The Deer Hunter is equally, well, not equally, but it's also really highly critically praised. So
Yeah. Yeah.
I think I would probably lean De Palma, and then between Peckinpah and Chimino, I don't know who I'd give the nod to.
I'd probably choose Peck and Paw just because I like Straw Dogs so much.
Straw Dogs was amazing. Um, it's yeah, and plus Heaven's Gate is while I didn't hate it, like that does kind of weigh down the Chimino as a whole. But I think between The Deer Hunter and Straw Dogs, I think I give the nod to The Deer Hunter. I don't know how you feel.
I prefer Straw Dogs, but they're both. It's just personal preference in the end, I think.
I got you. And next week or next recording, Sidney Lumet. I'm really excited. 12 Angry Men is supposed to be one of the best scripts of all time, is what I've heard. So that should be really exciting to cover.
Yeah, yeah, and they're both, I think, legal themed, so it
Yeah,
can bring in some interesting.
that will
Uh,
be that will be an awesome aspect because I think you're gonna have a lot of knowledge that I'm not gonna have, and I'm certainly gonna have questions like if certain things would make sense. You know what I mean?
yeah, I promise you, a lot of times they're not, but it makes for better entertainment when they're not, because it would be very boring if they were.
Yeah, exactly. Matt, I have to say thank you. I really appreciate you coming on and talking about this because I think we illuminated some cool stuff that I like had an innate appreciation for on Scarface, but Blowout more so than anything, like it legitimately changed my appreciation for the film. Because if I didn't look at it through that lens, I would have thought it wasn't as genius a movie as it really is.
I am right there with you. Like coming in, I was feeling like questionable about Blowout, and but when we talked about it, I realized I started like realizing how like great it was, and like how I kind of should stick by my initial rating. So
Absolutely. Matt, thank you again, and thank you all for joining us. that is all from us, and we will catch you on the flippity floop. Bye, y'all.